everyone, Retro Tech Dad here, and I've got a little bit of a different video here today. So I've had a bit of an emotional roller coaster the past week with the Lenovo Legion Go S, which I imported from Amazon UK because it's actually been available overseas for the past 2 weeks, and this specific model came in at about $100 cheaper than the US version. Now, this model I purchased from Amazon UK is the configuration that ships with 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage, and so that is partly why it's cheaper. But interestingly, it actually puts it more in line with the upcoming SteamOS variant that should be launching sometime in May for $499 US. Now, I was actually supposed to get this Go S sometime last week, but DHL decided to keep it in customs for several days, and when I actually filled them up, they said it was because of the tariffs, except that this package was coming from the UK, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's okay. Well, it finally showed up the other day, and I immediately jumped right in and loaded up my usual benchmarks and games that I like to test. Going into this, I knew that the Go S was not getting a whole lot of love since that Z2 Go is underperforming, and at its launch price of $729 US, it rightfully deserves some of that criticism. And when I finally started to launch the benchmarks and games, I was kind of blown away at just how bad the performance actually is with the Go S. And I went from being disappointed that I didn't get this unit last week to being very upset that this brand new handheld from Lenovo is performing worse than the vast amount of x86 handhelds that I've used in the past few years. I mean, these numbers were just downright terrible, and even at its max with 33 watts, it was still far behind in terms of performance. So I persevered and continued my testing and started to experiment with 15 watts because I was curious to see if maybe the Z2 Go offered more at a lower TDP, which I thought would be interesting considering the SteamOS version that is planned to release in a few months. And unfortunately, it just went from bad to absolutely terrible. And the Steam Deck, which mind you is now a 3-year-old handheld, outperformed the Go S at the same 15 watt TDP by a good amount. Now, after a lot of off-screen swearing, punching walls, and sharing my disgust with my friends on Discord, I knew that a different approach was needed, and so I decided it was time to check out Bazzite. So, why Bazzite? Well, it's pretty simple. Bazzite's awesome, but besides that point, it will give us an idea of what to expect with SteamOS, and the cool thing is that Bazzite does have official support already for the Legion Go S. And since I had an extra NVMe drive lying around, I figured why not. The best part is I don't even need to deal with a dual boot here. I'll just take out the included drive with Windows, put that to the side for now, and get a clean install of Bazzite on this spare drive I had. And by the way, the Go S does in fact take a full-size 2280 drive, which is a nice thing to see here. By the way, if you are planning on swapping any drives, just go really slow with the removal of the backplate since it is a bit tricky. So, after a bit of time, I finally got Bazzite up and running, and first off, I just want to say how great the experience is with Bazzite, and if this is any indication of what to expect when the official SteamOS support drops, I think many will be quite pleased. And, of course, with Bazzite all loaded up, it was time to get testing again and comparing my results. And I was pleasantly surprised. I went back and compared numbers, and across the board, the performance gains were fairly significant. I used the same exact settings when in Windows and then again in Bazzite, and all of these tests were conducted at 15 watts using a resolution of 1280 by 800 across the board, and there's a reason for these settings which we will get into in just a bit. So for Black Myth Wukong, there was nearly a 27% increase in performance coming from Windows to Bazzite. And then in the Forza Horizon 5 benchmark, we went from 46 frames per second to 56 frames per second, again representing about a 22% increase. With the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, we saw the average frames per second go from 36 to 45, with similar gains coming in at about 25%. And finally, everyone's favorite benchmark mode, Cyberpunk 2077, saw the biggest gains going from just 29.71 frames per second to 42.93 frames per second, which represents nearly a 44% increase in performance from the out-of-the-box Windows experience moving to Bazzite. This is definitely a positive for that upcoming SteamOS variant since it does signal that we will probably be getting much better results out of that Z2 Go. Now, if you remember, I did say that I ran all these tests at 15 watts using a resolution of 1280 by 800, which might give you an idea of where I'm going with this. So naturally I had to compare these Bazzite results to the Steam Deck with the same settings. And unfortunately, reality started to settle in, and looking at the Go S numbers from Bazzite and then comparing them to the Steam Deck, we can see that the Steam Deck outperformed the Go S in every single benchmark. In Black Myth Wukong, we saw the Steam Deck come in with an average of 47 frames per second compared to the Go S at just 38 frames per second, which represents almost a 26% increase for the Steam Deck. And then in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the Steam Deck came in with 57 frames per second, again outperforming the Go S's 45 frames per second, which represents almost a 27% gain. With Forza Horizon 5, the same is true with the Steam Deck coming in at 64 frames per second, which represents the smallest performance gain over the Go S, which resulted in about 14%, and interestingly the Go S did have less stutters compared to the Steam Deck. Finally, with Cyberpunk 2077, we saw the Steam Deck hit 50.05 frames per second average, compared to the Go S in Bazzite at 42.97 frames per second average, which is about 16% increase for the Steam Deck. Now, it's not all doom and gloom for the Go S, in particular when that $499 variant drops, since with the Go S we do have a top end of 33 watts, which means that you do have quite a bit of room to adjust here with the Go S, and looking at top end performance, while it's definitely better than the numbers at 15 watts, it's still not that impressive. But the extra power is there if you're less concerned with battery life, since you can push that top end, and so for $499 you do get a bit more out of your device. Of course, as it stands right now, the Windows version doesn't make a whole lot of sense at its price point, which I think if you were interested in the Go S, you kind of already knew that. And again, there are lots of things I like about the Go S, and it was actually the device I was most excited about after getting hands-on with it at CES. And I do think the upcoming SteamOS version brings some things to the table, namely official SteamOS support out of the box on a device that isn't the Steam Deck, and I do hope it brings in a new era of similar devices. With the Go S, you get a larger and higher resolution screen, and the display here is really nice with the Go S, and in terms of comfort, it's easily one of the more comfortable devices I've used. But the reality is that a Steam Deck, and in particular the OLED model, which is closer in line with that $499 price point of the Steam variant, puts it under a lot of scrutiny, since I don't think it brings that much of a better experience over the Steam Deck, and so I think for many the question remains, why does the Legion Go S exist? In fact, Lenovo's own original Legion Go has been cheaper, brand new, many times than this Go S at retailers like Amazon and Best Buy, which really drives home that question even further. Now, one thing's for sure in the x86 handheld space, prices never remain constant. And if we look at the MSI claw from last year as an example, there's a good chance that the Go S will see some price drops as time goes on, but I think in general this one is going to be a tough sell for most, and I'm a bit bummed, because I actually like what Lenovo has done with the Go S, and it's a shame that they just didn't pair with something a bit more competitive. Which, by the way, there is apparently a Z1 Extreme version coming in a few months as well, if you weren't already confused by all of the SKUs. So enough of all this, what are your thoughts on this Go S? Are you considering one, or are you waiting for the SteamOS version, or will you just continue using a Steam Deck or something else? Share down below, since I do love reading everyone's comments. But until the next time, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.